We are going to be 10 billion by 2050. We are going to live on a planet 4 degrees hotter. We are going to have more mouths and less food. We are going to have less land and more pollution. But we crossed oceans and we defeated diseases. But we went to the moon and we blossomed the desert. Because we are innovators. We are farmers. We are makers. We are dreamers. And we are going to gather and discuss, create and inspire minds and souls. Because we are feeding our future.
Food is something which, in my opinion, has always been and still is valued as one of the most important, if not the most important, necessity to sustain human life. Since our first days on Earth, agriculture has always supported our constant evolution and constant development, although, I must admit, recently, it seems as though it has been falling behind, and when compared to other sciences of equal importance, such as medicine, not experienced the same technological growth and innovation. Feeding 7 billion human beings is quite a challenging task, and seeing as this number is going to rise exponentially in the near future, well, it is imperative for agriculture and technology to collaborate and work together in order to find a solution. And furthermore, we must also consider that agriculture should probably take up a new meaning and not only refer to the production of edible goods, but actually embed in its definition sustainable development and the development also of a sustainable future for every single individual living on this earth. And finally, I would like to say that, well, I think it is the time for agriculture to embrace the technological innovation which is about to come. Thank you.
So hi, I'm Stephanie Strom. I'm a reporter at the New York Times, and I cover the food business, which is why I'm here. And I would like, first thing, if all of you guys could move to the front so we can make this a little more intimate. It doesn't feel like we're talking to an empty room here. So everybody come up and sit close together. Thank you. I really appreciate it. So I'm going to introduce the panel here by standing behind the person that I'm introducing. So this is Guido Rivolta. He's the Director General of CDP Equity, which is part of the CD Group at the Development Bank of Italy. It has an investment in Bonifiche Ferraresi, which is the largest farming company in Italy, and happens to be a big sponsor of this event. And here we have Rob Leclerc, who is the co-founder and CEO of AgFunder, which is an kind of online souk or marketplace that connects investors with up-and-coming ag and tech companies. And in the middle here, I guess there's two middles, we have Eric Sieber, who ran Nestlé's corporate venture funds for a while and is now involved with Bluefields Associates, which is a startup enterprise backed by the government of Dubai. And here I have Peter Kruger, who works with startup boot camps, foodtech accelerator in Rome, which right now is taking applications from startups for a new 3-month program. You're going to have more children, Peter. Next, we have Nadav Berger, who is the co-founder and CEO of Food Lab Capital. It invests in companies like one of my favorites, Rumatok. Did I say it right? Dumatok, Sweet, which develops technologies to help food companies find ways to reduce the level of sugar that they have to use in their products. And everybody knows nobody likes sugar anymore. So. And last but not least, we have Tim O'Connell, who's the head of acceleration programs at H, the letter H, Farm, which makes investments in and offers a variety of support to food tech upstarts, right? So you guys have everybody, the really great panel to talk to you about investment in the food tech area and what's going on and startups and all of that. And I'm going to start out by asking, we're gonna do this like a conversation, so I may not be the only person asking questions. I'm hoping they'll ask each other questions. But I'm going to get it started by asking one of you to be the brave first person who will talk about what the principal trends that you're seeing now that are emerging in the food tech space, and also what's driving them. Why are we seeing these trends now? Nadav? Yeah, let me get this up here too so you guys can for this end.
So just talking about the driver that makes all of us change actually the ecosystem that we live in, and actually everybody here is panelist, and the driver is the audience. So it's everyone here. Mm-hmm. And what I realized, and coming from food industry, third generation, whatever, is that what we are witnessing now is it's an upside down situation. We're used to marketeers to educate the audience. So you should buy an iPhone, Samsung is better, this guy is driving a Ferrari, whatever. So the marketeer, the sellers convince you to consume their product. Mm-hmm. And what we are witnessing, and this is the true driver, and this is why this is fascinating, is the audience, the consumer, is educating the marketeers. We don't want salt, we don't want sugar, we want local production, we want so many demands from a shaky industry. So the big thing is that it's here to last, and because of the audience is changing their habits. And so this is the motivation.
Is that because the audience is younger now? I mean, is it people like, people our age, the audience? Are we really talking about millennials and others?
I think the audience is becoming more digital, and this is a guy to answer for that.
Okay.
Actually, one of the trends that I would put in the top 5 would be the younger generation. Even the millennials are starting to lose out to the Generation Z.
Right.
Because Generation Z are changing the way they approach food. And I see it in Italy, but you see it particularly in other markets such as the US and the UK, where the younger generation has completely different expectations of what food is about. And that's going to be an amazing trend to see how that evolves in the future. We're seeing a lot, as you mentioned, personalization. Mm-hmm. People are expecting the convenience of food. It's a generation which now expects food to be delivered, and not in 24 hours, but in 2 hours or in 1 hour. There's a lot of personalization involved. So if someone doesn't want sugar, they expect to have options to have the same food, but without certain ingredients.
And so how does that influence then the trends in tech and food?
It's a good question. I mean, actually, it's tech and it's innovation which is able to deliver this. Mm-hmm. So if I want convenience, I can't do that just by having people going faster on a bicycle. I need to have systems that allow me to make that happen. Personalization is the same question. If I'm in a very old standard model of producing the same product for as many people as possible, the old Ford model, it's like you give the consumer what they want as long as it's a black car. That no longer exists. People are able to choose what they want when they want it. And that's making a big difference. The other thing we're seeing is this blend between bio in tech, which is massive. Finally, everything sustainable was kind of marginal one day. In the past, I remember in the U.S., being sustainable kind of meant, alternative, organic, small niche products. Today, that's no longer the case because technology is driving also organic. And so we're seeing these trends driving micro trends from below.
Okay.
And yet, I would like to say something different.
Okay.
It's not just about the consumer. I mean, the consumer, of course, it's the end driver of everything. But what we're seeing also is that the industry is going through a huge pressure, either by competition or because they have to often manage very low margin businesses. And that's a huge driver for innovation. What we've seen in our experience, the last cohort, out of 10 teams, which were coming from 8 different countries, 9 were B2B startups. And they were all addressing really important, specific problems in the industry, whether it's, fail rate of bars in the UK. Do you know that 50% of bars closed down in the first year? That's huge pressure, and it's not entirely driven by the audience.
Right.
Not to mention what it is today to be competitive in the fourth range segment. I mean, the salad that you buy in your plastic bag. So yes, it's the consumer, but I think there is a broader transformation of the industry. There is huge pressure among the players, which is driving innovation. And let me say, of course, I was at the World Food Program Accelerator last Friday. We also have these super mega trends coming in, which, whether we like it or not, they're going to force us to change our behavior.
Like?
Anything. I mean, when they're saying, and they're saying it in a pretty conservative way to me, that we have to increase productivity by 70% by 2050. This is something that is starting to affect production now. And of course, giving some really interesting opportunities to companies that have, new ideas. Sorry to hijack this, but I felt that, I had to say this.
So, Mr. Rivolta, you've invested in one of those companies, right? And
Go back a little bit to the old agri-food economy. Now, in Italy, agri-food economy represent around 3.2 million people. So it's 15% of the GDP of Italy. So in Italy, what we have diversity. Diversity of food. Each region has its own diversity. Then we have to mix diversity with globalization. So how we can bring the diversity to all the people around the world. So this is a very big challenge because we have the competence to produce good food, good agri-food, and we have the need to bring this food around the world. So it's a very big trend, and I think that the other point is the knowledge. The people know they want to eat good food, so they don't want to only eat food, but they want to eat good food, and they communicate each other much faster. And so it's a very important challenge how to bring the Mediterranean diet that is based on diversity on a global level. This is a very important challenge for us.
So what has Bonifiche been doing in terms of trying to keep up with the evolution of the food world that we see?
Well, speaking about what we are doing, so this panel is sponsored by Bonifiche Ferraresi. That is one of our portfolio company. CDP Equity is an holding company, so we invest in existing company. We don't do venture, but we do growth equity on the late stage. We inject capital for new investment. And Bonifiche is a very long story because it's a very old company. Has been listed on the Italian Stock Exchange since the Second World War, and it was the property of the Bank of Italy. And it's the biggest single soil property with 7,000 acres of single property. And what they've done, they do a geo mapping or geolocalization. We know exactly which is the chemical composition of the ground, of the soil. So knowing that, we do the fertilization of the soil, putting exactly the exact quantity of fertilizer that the soil needs. We do also seed. We put the seed with exact the same distance to have the same yield in all the grounds. And water is very important. We remove excess of water or we add water. And with this, we can increase the yield of the ground of 20%. But more of that, having a big property, we can assure the origin of the food that we put on the general market itself. So what we're trying to do, we're trying to be cool working in the field, working with big data, with drones, with apps. So bring back people to the countryside. And one very important number that I've read because I was shocked when I've read this number, that in Italy only the last year 600,000 new agricultural business started. No, 600,000 agricultural business are owned by under 35 years old, and 90,000 new business opened in 2016. So it's a big movement, and we have to keep eyes on these numbers. That
And
will
these
be
are
very important.
agricultural businesses?
Agricultural business mainly. We put agri-food together. So we do agriculture, we do food transformation also.
600,000 in the last year.
No, 600,000 younger than 35 years old, and 90,000 in only the last year.
Oh, wow. That's a lot. Wow. So historically, strategic investors have driven food technology development, right? The big players have been the big investors. But now it seems like the investment environment has changed and it's being driven more by VCs, private equity, and it's institutional money. So why is that? What's changed? Is it the big companies are afraid? They certainly have a lot of money. What's going on?
Maybe I can say something to this. So I've been 15 years with Nestle's corporate fund, which is a 750 million venture fund. And I looked at actually, so I think the big difference is before it was about agriculture and food and beverage. And the agtech and the food tech suddenly made it scalable, because the issue a little with agriculture and food and beverage is it's not scalable, right? You need to increase your revenue, you have to sell more. But actually the tech part brings in the scalability that VCs need to get the 4 times, 10 times return on invested capital. And this is why you see Google Ventures investing today, because they don't actually invest in agriculture. They invest in data or in tech that makes it scalable. And that's the big difference why the VCs are coming in.
That's interesting. And how much money roughly is available for investment in this area at this point? Institutional, and I'm talking about institutional money. And where, how much roughly?
This one's on? Okay. So basically last year we saw about $3.3 billion invested in agri-food tech. The year before was about $4.6 billion.
Wow.
So it's actually pretty significant. I would have to say, just a sort of a caveat to that, there was a real kickoff with some new companies out of Silicon Valley. The general idea was that you couldn't scale food companies. It wasn't an interesting area for venture capital. I think Hampton Creek was one of the first companies to come along and really crack that, despite some of the problems that they've had in the media. They were able to show that you could very rapidly take a traditional Silicon Valley model for startups and apply it to new industries. And since then, they've really cracked the ground open for a lot of other startups. And ultimately, I think what happened is venture capitalists woke up to the realization that agri-food is about 10% of global GDP. And so venture capitalists love really big markets. And it's been a market that was largely ignored. And there's only so many social mobile apps that you can do. And once you get to a point where you've sort of saturated that space and investment becomes very difficult to find, so you start to look at new industries. And so I think this was basically a function of a confluence of new technologies coming in, second, third time entrepreneurs coming in and trying to solve problems that were not directly or sort of traditional tech, but taking the same sort of principles that they learned over the last sort of 5 and 10, 15 years in Silicon Valley and applying them to new areas.
Okay.
But just to look at the numbers, if I looked very much at your numbers, and of the 3.3 billion, I think 40% is e-commerce, if I remember right, more or less, right?
Yeah.
So we talk about maybe 1.7, 1.8 billion. This is less than 1% of the total VC money spent last year. So we talk about, as you say, about the biggest industry probably, but we only talk about 1% really of VC money. So I think there is a way to go. So it's much bigger than it used to be 5 years ago, 10 times, right?
Yeah.
But it's still insignificant in VC kind of amount, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, just proportionally, to put that into perspective. So healthcare gets about 12% of venture capital, healthcare biotech, and also represents about 12% of global GDP. And we're talking in sort of agri-food, something along the lines of sort of 2 to 3% versus a 10% industry of GDP. So we're still sort of, I think, under-investing in the space largely.
And when you talk about e-commerce, Eric, it is what are we talking about? Are we talking about meal kits? Are we talking about?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the rocket internet kind of investments. It's the e-commerce platform delivery. Let's say delivery thing.
Delivery.
Which, I mean, you can argue or not about the business model. It's not mine, but I think it's one
That's
particular
not for this
argument.
discussion.
Exactly.
But the chain from the seed to the table is very, very long. So you produce tons, thousands of tons, and you sell kilos. So you have to work on logistics. And for example, another important initiative that we have done in Italy is supporting another Italian company that was specialized on meat processing, is Inalca, part of the Cremonini group. And into Inalca, they do 600 million euro turnover of food distribution around the world. So we are working with a project called Inalca Food and Beverage to bring around the world the Italian raw materials to have all the chefs and restaurants around the world able to produce good Italian cuisine, not working on the what can you say, the Italian sounding, but with real Italian raw materials. And logistics is very important, logistics that can also support the internet delivery, but if you don't have the logistics on the back, and especially if you work with food, time is very short to go to the table. So there is really, if you want to bring diversity to all the 7 billion people, there is a huge opportunity for everybody. First of all, you have to produce diversity no, and not standard products. And then you have to bring this diversity to the single customer that want to buy what he wants, whatever he wants around the world.
So is there room for a lot of investment in that logistical piece of it?
Logistics is very important. It's very important because without logistics, you cannot guarantee Italian products around the world. You can have Italian-sounding products in Asia or United States. Logistic, you can use logistic for frozen food, for dry food. It's not easy to use logistic for fresh food.
Right.
So just to add to logistics, logistics has its hurdles as well. As you are based in New York and you like, I'm sure that you like Caesar salad and probably at the Ritz or whatever, probably you know that the lettuce that you consume comes from California. So this specific lettuce in your Caesar salad drove for 4 days from California to New York, which for us from, Mediterranean sounds crazy.
I know.
So listen to this. The growers, they grow 90% of this lettuce in the US is grown in California, talking about logistics. So they pick up the lettuce and then they pick up the best lettuce and send it to New York because they need 4 days of shelf life, so they want it to perform in New York. And then they leave the less good lettuce or in California, so everybody loses. So when it goes to logistics, it has these obstacles as well. So now you could see the urban farming and local production, and we have a couple of guys here that are very involved in hydroponics, local produced lettuce, so it doesn't drive and with all the carbon effect and a lot of logistics.
So Tim and Eric, what kinds of, are you seeing, when you see startups come in for help, is it sort of like you saw with the development of apps where there'd be 10 of the same kind of apps come in and want to get help, or are you getting more of a variety of people doing different things when they come in?
Yeah, I mean, no, absolutely. I mean, in the beginning of this trend of let's say, food and agritech, I mean, there was this, at a certain point, everyone was no drones. Because we got to the point there was so many startups coming in with drone technology, it was like a game. But that's a trend that I think we see in almost the start of the growth of every industry, and it usually lasts maybe 6 months to a year, and then that kind of stables off. So I think that we did see some areas very crowded, and then we began to see things emerge that were really making a difference. Like as you anticipated, Peter, a lot in the B2B space. So this is a huge opportunity. So food delivery, and obviously another example of an inflated trend. Now it's really about bringing services. So when you were talking about logistics, places like China, logistics is a huge issue, but another issue is authenticity, traceability. The Chinese, funny enough, are more skeptical about the authenticity of the products that we are probably in Italy. We assume,
for good reason, right?
Yeah, when you buy something in Italy, you buy it, the tomato paste, you just assume it's from Italy, or the pasta that they grain, and it's not always the case. I mean, sometimes prosciutto doesn't always
be misunderstood on logistics. So, make you an example. In Alca, they do food distribution in Africa.
Yeah.
So they introduced for the first time, for example, in Angola and in other countries, the frozen chain. This is mandatory if you want to sell meat.
Yeah.
No,
And
if
very
you want
complex,
to
too.
animal protein to billion or million of peoples. Then, if you want to have to Italian restaurant real Italian food, you have to bring to them this food. Logistic is against the kilometro zero, we say
Absolutely.
in Italy. So you have to eat
Yeah.
the local products, the fresh product where the products grow up. And this also can bring you the diversity. If you go to Sicily, you eat Sicilian food. If you go to Lombardia, you do the Lombardy cheese.
And this is where you get a question of, I mean, logistics often is a question of organization, but on the other hand, investments of having logistic network, but it's also innovation. You know, it's finding how to get those products. So as you said, I mean, frozen foods in Africa is a complex situation. I mean, you can't just go out and buy huge freezers and put them all over Africa. You have to find an innovative solution. And so this is an area that we have a startup that just finished a program which is working with Chinese partners to determine authenticity by European brands. So it's quite interesting. So the Chinese, with their phones, can trace back the origins of a certain product, where the milk came from, where the wheat came from in Europe. And that's, you know, these are the type of value-added services which are quite interesting to the
So
market.
if I'm buying something in China, for instance, that says it's made in Italy, they can actually ensure that it's made in Italy and not just a Chinese.
Ensure it, but also see where in Italy
Where
it's
in Italy
made
it
and
was
which
made,
farmers
yeah.
actually produced that product and where it's coming from, which is a great added sale for a Chinese consumer, because they can actually understand, okay, that milk comes from this area in Parma, or that, you know, that beef comes from this area in Tuscany. So these are
So,
things
yeah,
that I think there's a lot of opportunities for young people to get, you know, to start seeing these spaces of need and create solutions. It takes time. You know, that's why we have to invest a lot. You know, the government and many other associations related to government are doing a lot. A lot of us are doing this, but it takes time. It's going to take at least another few years.
The traceability is a key, no? Especially also to guarantee the quality around the world.
So traceability, anybody seeing a lot of people coming in working on food safety, or what's the courant thing?
Yeah, so we don't see enough innovation in food safety and traceability. If you look at Chipotle, for instance, they were a $20 billion company that lost about half of their market cap because of food safety issues. And this then ties into food traceability, because today they still were not able to trace that back to the origins of where that happened. They instead invested mostly in franchise expansion rather than in technology that would allow them to sort of scale them out. We've seen a few sort of point solutions, but because often traceability sort of starts at the farm and kind of ends near or by the consumer and distributor, that's a technology that sort of becomes pervasive through the value chain. We think those are really interesting places to make bets, although we have not seen that much in this space. So just a couple examples, there was a group that's basically using a kind of barcoding with algae. So they do an algae wash on produce. It's sort of barcoded because of you can sort of genetically sequence it, and then follow that through the value chain and know what that provenance was, that it's the same thing that you ended up getting. People are starting to do some things with blockchain to understand sort of custody. People are working with certain sensors that can sense, say, the freshness of berries as it goes through the supply chain, and speed up, for instance, or prioritize certain pallets over others, so that we can get those berries, for instance, more to the customers quicker. So there are some things, but given the amount that you'll see in sort of farm tech or sort of, you know, like e-commerce, we don't see enough in the value chain, and I think it just isn't as consumer facing, that maybe entrepreneurs aren't as familiar with that value chain.
Just to add to traceability, something very interesting is happening, and this has to do with again, the consumer, the audience. I think that all of us having this unique device in our hand, eventually traceability will get to this one. So you'll have a smartphone that can trace residuals of pesticides on the things that you buy. There is actually 2 companies that you can see at the pavilion. That one is Inspecto from Israel. The other one is part of the consortium. Delspec. I mean, incredible. They give the power to the people that can come now to the supermarket and said, well, you're selling me this apple which is full of pesticides or is 3 months old. I mean, I don't buy it. So just assume this consumer come to the store manager and saying, I have this device, okay, here it is, it's accurate, I traced you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, actually, these guys are doing even more. They're not tracing, they're actually detecting. They actually can detect directly at a product. And in fact, I would agree, I mean, we didn't see many convincing applications of traceability in terms of guaranteeing quality of produce rather than safety of produce. I would say most of the applications we saw and where there's a lot of applications running blockchain is more on building the markets, especially for commodities, especially for emerging countries. This one of traceability and health is one of those big problems that no one has really cracked, as, for example, all these nutritional applications that are supposed to help you have a better life. I mean, we've seen a huge wave of applications that were promising, some even really big in terms of user adoption and so on, but in the end, they all, boom, fall down. And those are incredible opportunities. We still see a lot of crazy ideas coming out, and possibly one is going to be the interesting one.
Well, it's interesting because you hear everybody talking about traceability and transparency, right? But what you guys are saying is that there's really not that much, there aren't many people sort of testing the waters there.
I think, innovation, it's a complex thing, okay? And it goes by waves. So everyone, 2 years ago, it was all delivery. I was in India last year, and there were just all these depressed startuppers that had gone through the wave of delivery. And then, of course, at some point, first they're all jumping into it, and then they're all running out of it. But still, then you find, like, I met a team just a few days ago, and they managed to crack in a very big European city, delivery in 7 minutes. They're doing delivery in 7 minutes.
Wow.
Okay, so innovation is a crazy thing, okay? And I'm sure that the same is going to happen with, for example, all this sort of health nutritional application things, okay? Yeah.
So when you first saw that application about 7-minute delivery, were you like, oh, it's just another delivery?
Well, so our last call, we had more than 600 applications. Right. Almost 100 were delivery platforms.
Yeah, that's what I mean. 100.
So we had applications doing delivery from Chennai in India, which is still probably an interesting thing because it's a country as big as probably half UK, a city. But, most of them were actually, what are we doing there? And then still we found one.
The 7-minute delivery.
No, we found one, which was the only one that really caught our attention, a Colombian team that is doing a sort of a campus-focused delivery model, and they're currently running robots in Berkeley, UC Berkeley.
Okay.
That was an edge. I mean, these are crazy people. They're not even robots. They have these things going, and they're remote controlled by people in Bogota that cost 1/5, what you spend. Don't say this to Trump, okay? But anyway, because delivery, the biggest problem for delivery in the US, and especially in places like California and so on, is the high cost of delivery.
Right.
These guys are managing to...
Why Berkeley?
Sorry?
Why Berkeley?
Why to Berkeley? Because they managed to get in first, after 7 campuses in LATAM.
That said no.
No, actually, they're planning to launch soon also in Stanford.
Do they have any in Colombia?
They're actually operating in 7 campuses.
Okay.
4 in Colombia, 3 in Chile.
Okay, that's very cool.
Kiwi.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
Wow. So that brings me to another question. Where is the innovation coming from? Is it just coming, is it coming from around the globe? Are you seeing people come from everywhere wanting to do new things in food and ag tech? Or is it primarily from the Western world? What do you see?
If I can we sort of, in our scouting, we really go global. And so last year, the third country per number of applications was the US, just to give you an idea. Innovation is coming from everywhere. The problem is that a lot of these startups are natively sort of localized. Okay. And so it's very hard to really transport them. But
okay.
Yeah, so we see most of the investment capital still in the U.S., but we see major capital centers like China and India as far as sort of international and emerging markets. We see companies there. I think you'll see entrepreneurship wherever capital is available. And so if there's not capital, you're going to find some really talented entrepreneurs who say, look, we could do something in this space or we could do something else. And so wherever capital is going to be readily available, Silicon Valley has a bit of a monopoly on that. So we still see quite a few companies coming from there, I think, for that very reason. Although we do see more breadth than we do in the sort of the broader tech industry.
I'm biased here, and I'm coming from Israel, so it's people say that we're a startup nation, but I don't like this term, but it really is the spirit of entrepreneurship. So for a Jewish mother, it used to be either to have a child, a doctor or a lawyer. Now it's becoming someone with a startup.
Okay.
So I was speaking on a panel in San Francisco Convention Future Food Summit a month ago. And the moderator, there were 5 VCs talking, the best VCs in the Valley, and the moderator asked, so where's the next place to generate innovation? And I was very proud that Dan Phillips from Sandbox just took the mic and said, Israel. So innovation is great, it's happening everywhere because it is needed, and food industry is local and global, so it will happen everywhere, but I think that Israel is a good hub for that.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think it's a very interesting question, and I think what you saw is that the US was actually leading this clearly about 4 years ago, and now you see that China and India is actually very close behind, and I think actually Chile is also a very good place for food. But Europe is actually afterwards, so you have US, China, India, I think Canada, and then Europe as an entire country. And which is surprising to me, right? Because
why would you? Why? I think it's because there's such great food available everywhere in Europe. So
why? I don't want to speculate why. It could be because it's small countries, and because you say actually startups are always often local at that sense of the day. But what I wanted to say is we actually try to counteract that, and there's an initiative in Europe called EIT Food. Yeah. Which is a 1.6 billion euro initiative over the next 7 years by 50 universities and companies like Pepsi, Nestle, John Deere, Nielsen, which will invest in and do research in and to support accelerators and startup programs from farm to the consumer. And so 1.6 billion over 7 years, I think, is quite a tremendous amount spent by companies and universities to, I think, hopefully get Europe back on that innovation map.
Yeah, yeah.
I wouldn't be so. Well, again, because we do a lot of scouting. No, Europe, I would say, is very interesting. Okay, there is one problem. Okay, of course, we all know the food industries are among the most subsidized in the world. So, of course, least, let's say, ready to innovate. Okay, they're less put under pressure. But this is changing. I can say this, that you go to China and India, and you see a lot of these, let's say, delivery just being replicated like anything. So because those are markets that are open, growing, there are huge opportunities just to base really even simple operations, get them going. Here you have to be a little bit smarter. And so we see a lot of technology in the Netherlands, in the UK, even in Italy, in France, in Germany. Sorry?
Like what? Give us an example.
Well, I can mention my own because these are the ones that, this is very bad. But, like, for example, Germany, you have a team that is adapting aeroponics to home basic growing.
So you grow it at home.
Food, just to say one. Or where is Adam? There's Adam. Hydroponic containers. I mean, he's coming from basically Wales. Or another team, Irish team from the biotech university in Cork that are developing substitutes, protein-based substitutes of sugar. Okay, so in fact, I'll tell you, when it gets to technology, the things that we see in Europe are very highly advanced, and so just check around. Okay.
What we see on speaking about old economy, because I'm working on the finance sector. My background, I'm a mechanical engineer. I've done a PhD thesis on agricultural tractor, Same Trattori. It's an old Italian company. And I was in China not a few months ago, And there is a very strong interest, so a political interest on acquiring agricultural technology company. So, for example, everything that can improve the work on the field, mechanization, seeding machine, fertilization machine. So there is a lot of new old companies now, also in Italy, because Italy was one of the key regions where the mechanization of agriculture developed after the Second World War. And we still have a lot of know-how. And this company, they are exporting a lot in Asia because they are improving their life in the field. So there are many things that can be done to improve and to help to feed the 7 billion people with quality food.
So are there, I guess I'd like one or two of you to tell us what the biggest challenges are when you look at sort of developing innovation towards food and ag. What stands in the way? Is it government regulation? Is it not enough money? Is it nobody's coming up with good ideas? Yeah.
So I think there's two things you need fundamentally. You need talent and a concentration of talent, and you need a concentration of risk capital. If those two things come together, you have most of what you need at that point. Now, if you have your company, then the biggest challenge I think that's probably going to stand in your way is distribution. You have this whole sort of incumbent layer of distribution channels, whether you're doing ag tech or food tech. It's sort of this B2B industry. If you're doing B2C, you need to somehow penetrate into that. Some of the best companies have figured out ways to sort of sidestep the incumbent channels, but those I would say would be the sort of the three pieces.
Give us an example of doing that.
Okay, of sidestepping?
Yeah.
Okay,
going around the existing system.
Okay, so a company called Farmers Business Network.
Yeah, good. I'm glad you mentioned it.
Is a good example. So now they've taken a unique example. If you don't know what Farmers Business Network is, they started off. It was a guy named Amol Deshpande. He was a partner at Kleiner Perkins, had worked at Cargill and said, hey, there's this sort of greenfield opportunity where we can start to aggregate all of this farmer data, put it together, and then give farmers some solutions. And they weren't really clear exactly what the ultimate business model would be, but they knew that there was something there. What they've done then is they basically, because how do you get to farmers was the big question, right? And so you could go to traditional distribution channels like ag retail firms or try to advertise. And what they basically did was go and organize these town halls and do a lot of door-to-door. Now, this was in a very, very expensive sales process. Eventually, their business model iterated around sort of creating kind of these virtual cooperatives by which they could aggregate the sort of purchasing of seeds and inputs, and they could compare prices between what people were paying in certain counties versus other counties. And this really empowered farmers on the system. And so there's a certain virality to this right now, but what they had to do was raise just a ton of money because their initial sales process was very expensive. Counter that with another group, something like Farm Logs. Farm Logs basically said, look, we've raised quite a bit of money, but not quite the same amount of money. So how do we start to get distribution? And one of the things that they did was basically create a freemium layer. So they would create a layer of value that was free for growers to use. They claimed something like 30% of farmers in the U.S. Are on their system, and to whatever degree that means, at least they have opened a channel of communication, a two-way channel of communication, which they can now sell sort of value-add products and services into. So we're starting to see that now as they sort of they've developed a hardware solution and a more sort of a premium solution that they can sell into that market. But that's a way to sort of sidestep the traditional distribution channels.
Yeah, because normally in the U.S. the farmer deals directly with the seed company, right? And it's just the seed company and John Deere collects all the data.
Yeah, you're talking to your agronomist or some of the local dealers, and so there's a whole bunch of middlemen in place. And so to get your technology into the hands of those growers, or even if you want to sort of sell into sort of a supermarket, you got to go through, Whole Foods, or there's always these gatekeepers you've got to go through. And so to to find another way around, for instance, Kickstarter was a great way to sort of get around gatekeepers, because you could show demand for a product and then take that demand to somebody like Whole Foods and say, look, people already love this. We have a following.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that the first 2 points are, I mean, on the money. It's all about talent and risk capital, right? And I think that we also need to identify ways to be able to do that outside of just Silicon Valley, because Silicon Valley cannot, I mean, I don't think it's going to be the innovation center for agri-tech and farm tech in the world. I think there's a lot more happening. If you look at a country like Italy, you look at Spain, you look at France, you know, the amount of brands and the amount of industries that we have, they have hundreds of years of traditions, and this really laid the groundwork of giving us the opportunity to drive that innovation. The problem is you need capital.
Yeah, so
that's the biggest problem, because in Italy, but I think it's in Europe in general, we work with startups from all over, from the Netherlands, from Germany, from the UK, from France, from Spain, from Portugal. We had quite a few from Portugal this year. There's a lot of ideas. There's a lot of young people who are really trying to make a difference. Now we need to shift them a little bit in a more constructive way, a little bit away from the consumer. You know, so we have to get away from the food deliveries and stuff, and they have done that. I think that's happened in the last year and a half. They're getting into the B2B spaces. The problem is now we need to find them capital so they can actually, you know, put these ideas into place. That's one of our biggest challenges. So is to find that capital.
Silicon Valley is sort of structurally hostile to investing outside of Silicon Valley, and that may sound strange, but it's so the structure of traditional venture capital is an investor is going to sit on the board of every company that they invest in, and if you're sitting on 10 boards of sort of 10 companies and you're having 4 board meetings a year, so that's 40 board meetings. Now, if your company is across the street, that's a short trip, but if your company is in Italy, add 3 days. 3 days times 4 times 10. I mean, it starts to grow too big, and people just fundamentally want to spend time with their family.
But these are the technology guys. There's this thing called, what is it? I FaceTime and all this other stuff. Can't they go to a board meeting that way?
Yeah, and so I mean, we're actually in the process of raising a $20 million fund that'll be investing globally, and that was our mandate from the beginning. And we're looking to break out of that traditional venture model and show that you can invest in the best companies internationally, not just the best companies in your backyard. So, and we hope to sort of help get others to follow behind us on that.
I must admit that you have a very animated panel here. Everybody wants to talk, so I'll be ready for a second. Just to build on what was said, I think that, again, everybody will agree that food tech is the high tech of the 90s. So it's here to stay. It's huge. It's booming. Yeah. It's so exciting. But I think that the real obstacle, and building on what's said, that you have the entrepreneurs, and they're there. So an entrepreneur did cyber, and now he's doing food tech. I mean, the notion of entrepreneur is entrepreneur. He will change the world. And then you have money. I mean, money is starting to pouring into this amazing industry, emerging industry. What is lack is a professional management that can run investment in this field. So if you want to raise a fund for high tech, obviously we will have thousands, people, you know, applications for running the fund with a lot of experience and credentials and so forth. If you want to create a fund for food tech, ag tech, there's still a lack of management that can do it, that knows about the food, about the supply chain, about the consumer, about the shelves, the retailers, but knows about ventures, knows about investment, know how to do it. And if you want to raise a fund, you should, by the way. You'll find it very difficult to find professional. For example, Eric. Eric worked for 15 years in Nestle.
Right.
He used to sell Nestle products, going from store to store. After those 15 years, he did 15 years in running their fund. So I don't think that there are many Erics like this.
Okay, I want to say something here. Let's remember that the food industries, from farm to the shelves, are probably the hardest industry, the most kind of hardware industries are out there.
I know
and
this.
if there is a reason this whole thing is happening now, it's because it took time. It took time not just for the technology to evolve, and that also was required, but also it took time in terms of the receptiveness by this industry to start really innovating. And I think that this is going to be a slightly different story than the typical Silicon Valley story. Innovation happens where there is qualified demand for innovation. And especially in this industry, which is so well rooted and has a lot of protections, we're going to see much more of this stuff happening in a more sparse and distributed way. I see Germany playing a huge role. I see the Netherlands playing a huge role. France, possibly, hopefully, Italy, it could. Of course, India and China, and probably also the Southeast Asia. There's a lot going on there. Because in the end, it's really, who is buying it, okay? Of course, the digital revolution was a Silicon Valley story, a totally Silicon Valley story. But guess what? When it gets to food tech, in fact, I would say that New York is almost more interesting than the Silicon Valley. When I'm talking about food tech, and especially retail space, shelf space, okay? When you're talking about agtech, certainly the Silicon Valley is more interesting. So let's see where it goes. But of course, there's only one problem, as Tim said, and it's capital. Right. We really have a huge problem with capital. We have a huge problem with smart capital. We don't have players, okay? Now, slowly, they're coming up. This should be fostered in some way.
And just to comment on capital, capital really begins even before the entrepreneur. So you have a whole bunch of sort of venture capital funds, or actually, I should say, a small group of venture capital funds, a larger group that are trying to raise their funds. The typical fund takes about 2 years to raise. Typical funds in sort of agri-food tech are sort of 3 years, if not longer. We've seen some sort of tap out. And one of the problems is A, there's not a lot of track record to go to limited partners with, to those investors who invest in funds. There's not a lot of people who understand the industry, and so you've got to tell them a story. Hey, I'm an emerging manager. We have no track record in this industry. We don't know what the returns are going to be like, but you should believe us. And that's a challenge, so not just for entrepreneurs, but for the managers who are trying to raise the capital to invest in the entrepreneurs themselves.
They eat, don't they?
They eat, and
they aren't all drinking Soylent.
Yeah, but sometimes most of the investors, I mean, they come from centers of capital that are far removed from where food is produced, and so for all intents and purposes, it's a black box to them.
They're like many consumers, right? I always say that the average consumer thinks her chicken thighs grow in a styrofoam tray in the grocery store, right?
Yeah.
So it's how do we reconnect everybody to their food,
Exactly.
the investors as well as the consumers.
I just want to make one to your thing about the Silicon Valley culture of driving to the startup. So I don't know, we have had this fund since 2000, so 17 years. We're probably the first users of Skype in the world. But actually, I used to be on 12 boards, so China, New Zealand, US, and we did it all out of Geneva, right? I mean, once you hop on a plane, you hop on a plane. It doesn't matter if it's 1 hour or 10 hours, because actually getting there and getting home is good. So don't worry about your fund. You will be managed to. Honestly, you will be able to manage it. That's number one. Second, I think the biggest issue is actually time to market, and that's both in the industry and in the startup. So I know Nestle well. So Nestle has 400 to 500 factories, right? Producing $100 billion worth of goods. So you can imagine how many products per day in countries from Algeria to South Africa they produce. So what it is a food safety company. What they are afraid of is that one single product in 1 year kills somebody. And that is Maggi issue, which was a fake issue by the government, right? But still it showed you what actually can happen. So this industry is not about innovation in the first place. The first driver of this industry is food safety. That's what you said, right? And so you have to remember that. And only if they're pressed almost by margins or government or consumers, they really innovate, I think. That's number one. The second one is the time to market for startups. If you invest in Instagram, the scalability is so fast that you can get a return fast. That's what I meant before. Right. In F&B, it will take longer, and this is one of the issues actually that you have also, right? You have to have a longer time horizon.
It takes 2 years to raise a cow before you can eat it.
Absolutely.
That's what I always say.
It takes longer. I think now the tech part is getting faster, right? The digital things, but the F&B still takes 7 years average. Our investment holding period is 7 to 9 years.
Yeah.
So of course, if you have a 10-year fund, that makes it kind of difficult, right? Because you don't invest in 1 year all your money. So this is, I think, one of the issues.
Okay. Yeah.
Going back to your point that it's not easy to make money on agtech as a venture capital investor. Agriculture. So it's like in the clean tech some years ago. Now everybody wants to invest in the clean tech, and not a lot of funds bring good result in the clean tech because The problem is that innovation, you cannot have a really game changer into this sector, because the agri-food business is a very old business. We start with that, and it's not easy to innovate. One of my most important things, one of our key point is how we can help to Italian diversity food. For example, there is a very important story on the Prosecco. No? Prosecco was a second-tier quality wine in Italy, no? And now, if you go to US, everybody wants to drink Prosecco, but then you don't have enough production of Prosecco to satisfy the need. No? If you want,
guys didn't want it, so we'll take
You
it.
create demand that way.
you create demand. So if you speak about, for example, high quality mozzarella, no, mozzarella di bufala, we don't have enough bufala to do the mozzarella di bufala. So the communication, so through internet, everybody want to eat mozzarella di bufala and to drink prosecco, but it's not easy to globalize diversity. And this will be one of the biggest challenges, to try to globalize diversity or to have infinity diversity to satisfy global demand.
Well, this is actually a big problem for the large corporations as well. You have a McDonald's, which is going to try to go all cage-free by 2025. And they announced this last year. So you think about that. That's 9 years, 9 years that they need to take to turn their ship around, because it's so big. Now, I can go buy cage-free eggs, probably down the street here, no problem. But a large company can't do that. And by 2025, cage-free, if it's that easily available, because I think in the US, McDonald's accounts for about 1/3 of all egg use. By 2025, if that's just sort of the standard, maybe that's even not sufficient. And so they're going to have to take another 9 years to steer it further. There's a real big challenge for some of the big companies, where smaller companies can be more nimble.
Yeah. So we haven't talked about Africa at all and innovation. Why is that? Why aren't we seeing innovation in Africa, where arguably they have the most need for it?
So if I went back to Africa in 1998 and I said, hey, let's bring a cell phone to Africa, the challenge would be we don't even have cell phones in the US. And right now, sort of if we talk about agritech, it's the costs are very high in the US market. It's kind of like 1995 in the internet, really, is how the technology is. So to say, hey, let's just jump straight to Africa without crushing those costs in a developed market seems a little premature. Now, that said, there are technologies, particularly around remote sensing, particularly around marketplaces, digital agronomy, that can be applied and are being applied. But I think you have to just take into account sort of the particular market and the constraints of that market. And so the number of potential possibilities gets a little more limited.
Mm-hmm.
I think that one of the issues we have to deal with is what is innovation and technology that's VC interested, and what is innovation and technology which is just actually national or just for the general good interested. So Africa is actually seeing an enormous amount of innovation if you consider where they were 10 years ago. So I absolutely agree. It's not VC interested type of innovation. That I think is, so coming from Silicon Valley, I think it's very hard for them to think today that's my next point of investment. Mm-hmm. But what's very interesting is there's a lot of things, South America, the same thing. There's a lot of innovation going on in South America around diversity, around getting small products into the market, around encouraging young people. As you mentioned, 90,000 new small enterprises in Italy from young people. That's a very interesting point. The question is, out of that 90,000, how many of those businesses will be using technology which is VC interested? Probably very few. Does that mean there's not an opportunity there? Absolutely not. There's a huge opportunity, but it's an opportunity which is, it has to be managed probably with a different level of investment. So we really need to balance the two of these, because we need success stories in places like Italy around these type of investments. There maybe are coming out of places like Silicon Valley or Israel or other places, but we need to also balance those with success stories of actually just young people creating successful small businesses. And this is another area where I think that we have a huge amount of opportunity, in particular in Southern Europe.
Well, it was interesting. I was listening to something here this morning, and the lady was talking about the Gates Foundation has financed a project where they're going to basically have sort of a litmus paper type of test for milk, to test milk for bacteria, so that small farmers in Africa can test, create a market for themselves, essentially. You test your milk after it comes out of the cow. If there's no bacteria, you can send it to the processor, right? And it made me wonder, why isn't that something that a VC would be interested in?
But I think Africa is interesting, to be honest, and I think there's a lot of innovation in Africa, but you have to look at what can they afford. So they scumped the internet into the cell phone, right? Mm-hmm. And actually the payment things or information for farmers through the phone is a huge business, and some people made a lot of money.
So, yeah.
And for example, Abraj Capital, which is a private equity fund based in Dubai, right? They have now, since 2000, have assets under management of 9 billion, with a return of 25% gross and 18% net. They're just raising another 9 billion this year, only investing in emerging markets, North Africa, Pakistan, India, whatever. In Morocco, the World Bank just supported the launch of 3 venture funds, seed funds, which about 20 million euros, and they have been, within 3 months, this money was taken, managed, and whatever. So I do think it's a huge thing, but the implementation is difficult, right? Mm-hmm. And the cost. So you cannot do premium products in Africa. No. But if you talk about communication, small farmers, digital 1 cent thing, I think it's huge. And the solar power is going to change everything, because I think energy is going to be free in 10 years. And with solar power, and this is very, very powerful. So I think Africa is interesting, maybe a little early, but it will be big soon.
Yeah, and that example you gave, it could be venture backable, but at the same time, if the Gates Foundation is subsidizing it with sort of $50 million a year with zero margins, then it's not venture backable, because there's not a real business model for those entrepreneurs.
It just made me wonder, why didn't somebody try to do it as an entrepreneurial thing, Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Well, this is, my other favorite example is this company called Appeal. Have you all heard of Appeal? Where they make these coatings for produce that extends the shelf life. You can basically have, a bunch of 7 bananas, 1 ripens Monday, 1 Tuesday, 1 Wednesday. And they started with funding from Gates and Rockefeller. But then, Andreessen got involved. And so they work with Gates and Rockefeller in Africa, but he wants it for the U.S.
Yeah, one of the challenges in the sort of anything sort of packaging, food traceability, food safety, is the question of who pays for it. Mm-hmm. And so we've talked to a lot of investors who have invested in this space, and they're like, what a great idea if people just used it. But then the question is, everyone else wants somebody else to pay for it.
Right.
And so it never gets adopted.
Well, but if I'm a strawberry, or if I'm a tomato producer, right, and I can actually leave my tomato on the vine and until it gets red, instead of shipping it to me in New York when it's green, somebody's gonna pay for that. If I'm a tomato producer, I'm gonna pay for that, because my product tastes better and people are gonna buy it, right? So anyway, well, we've got 10 minutes left, guys. Tell me what challenges why don't each of you give me one example of an interesting idea that you've seen in the last year that either has or hasn't gotten money, and explain to me why it got money and why it didn't get money. Peter? Everybody hands the baton. Who wants to answer that?
I'm taking your question slightly different, and if I may, I would have rephrased it as what's interesting. What would I invest in if it was, if I had the opportunities, and I think that I revealed, but it's not my knowledge, but I think that there is a market nobody seems to pay attention to within food tech, and this is something that I called restotech.
What?
Restotech.
Rescotech.
So it's restaurant tech.
Okay.
But I'm not talking about delivery at all. So delivery is over, it's too much now. overstated, but when you think of restotech or hospitality business, you have to think of the market, and 52% of the share of stomach of the Americans is consumed out of home. This industry seems to be so even primitive. So it's a huge market. 52% of the food is consumed out of home. Restaurants, hotels, banquet halls, coffee shops, and so forth. But technology seems not to reach there yet. Only in deliveries, of course.
Yeah.
So, and this is why you see so many restaurants opening up and closing down, shutting down after 6 months, a year. The numbers are frightening. But this is a market that actually urge for new technologies in terms of running the business, getting the right solutions. We've invested in a company named Simple Order that runs all the supply chain for the restaurant, including the orders. We have a strategic alliance with Metro now in Europe. So it's a huge market. Again, 52% of the share of stomach of the food. And the marketeers don't know a lot about it. Market share, trends, campaigns, if they're successful or not. So there's no data, no great technologies to run it, traceability, all those issues should go into out-of-home consumption as well.
Okay.
Well, I would leave it like this because we have some pretty good teams in restotech and we're very happy with that. Let's keep it because there is some crazy stuff and very interesting and very disruptive to the industry, especially when it gets to marketeers, providing data and so on. I would almost rephrase it, turn it around. I mean, I think the big thing now is there's been a lot of buzz of technologies that are still failing.
Okay.
Right? We've seen a huge wave in precision farming, and it's hard to scale. We're finally finding out that it's hard to scale, at least in certain markets you can scale it. Or what about drones? Where's my drone delivering, my pizza here? I think this is more what, because in the end, I think that currently, if you have a good team, you have a good idea, you get a good model, you can find support, and you can develop. So it's hard that something really good doesn't come out. What I see and where I see the biggest opportunities is where technologies are still not delivering the promises, because there is a lot to do. There are big problems that have to be solved that we're facing now that we have these technologies, and someone is going to find the way around. And that's where it's really going to become interesting.
So you're still gonna accept drone applications.
Yeah, of course.
So you find the one that works, right?
Yeah. Application we accept. Yeah. Whether we select them is a different story.
I mean, it's a difficult question to ask, but I would say something. I read this morning again that, like in Spain produces strawberries, right? And actually, we in Switzerland can eat Spanish strawberries in February, right? Our strawberries come now. But one bar like this, 100 gram, uses 150 liters of water. And what I think, so you asked the question, does the consumer need to know that tech is behind the food? I don't think so. But what they should know is the impact of their action of consuming strawberries in February, which they don't. And actually, I think there's simple methods like having government forcing you to say how much water you use, how much pesticides you use, and put it on a nutrition label. That would be something very similar to...
It's not going to happen in my country anytime soon.
It's not going to happen, it's Trump. No. But I was thinking this morning, so the water use, I think, is going to be our biggest problem in agriculture, and we have to reduce this somehow. And I think the pressure comes from the consumer, as we said before in food safety with diagnostic. And if my kids know that the strawberries I give them use 150 liters of water, they will not eat them. But if they see red strawberries in front of them, they will eat them.
Well, you get a lot of pushback from industry too, because I remember when California was in drought, and newspapers like mine started showing, one walnut took some enormous amount of water to produce, and the walnut industry went crazy angry about that.
So,
if you want, I'll give you two examples. So you wanted to be concrete. And I'll choose two from our latest program just to make it simple. One in B2B and one to B2C space. In the B2B, we had a startup from Germany. I think they're here. You guys here? They are here. Grando, who brought to us the most simple problem that we could imagine. That farmers have a very inefficient system to buy products, fertilizer, seeds from the suppliers. And they presented us a very simple way to bring cost savings to the industry and bring opportunities both to the farmers and the suppliers. These are the type of programs that I think are obvious and it makes sense, especially in industries where there's disruption to be had. So this was a great example. In the B2C space, we had another team coming from the UK who found that still today, even though we're all talking about healthy eating, talking about how we're supposed to take care of ourselves, we have the most horrid selection of snacks to eat during the day. So if you go into any company, any school, any organization, you just have horrible things to eat. And so they came up with a company which is around healthy snacking. It's called Stop My Craving. And we also just like that because of the way it was just addressing a real problem that any of us can relate to, because it's true. If you look at any school, there's just not healthy snacks, and this is their focus. So there are simple problems, obvious, and they're easy to resolve. And so these were the type of businesses that we like. There isn't a lot of super high technology behind it. I mean, there is, obviously some form of big data going on and machine learning on how to do this better. But at the end of the day, it's really just addressing simple issues.
So we're really excited about robotics, and one area that we have not seen a credible team fielded and produce a product is around driverless tractors. And I'm not necessarily saying let's make a driverless tractor, but how can we make tractors driverless? Right now there's 500,000 used tractors that could be converted to driverless tractors. And we have just not seen it. And it's going to be quite sad that we're likely going to have level 5 autonomous cars before we get a level 5 autonomous tractor. And if you think about the difficulties on developing a level 5 autonomous car compared to a tractor, the average tractor runs about 400 hours every year. A farm may have multiple number of those tractors run in a very, very narrow window. Labor is extraordinarily expensive, and it's a big pain point for farmers. Not to mention, this is one of the reasons why we have these really big tractors, 400 horsepower tractors, is because labor, it is sort of making up for labor. You need to sort of tow or use these very, very large implements. If we had driverless tractors, we could use much lighter tractors. There'd be less soil compaction, which means higher yields, which means also sort of less dependency on things breaking down. And so we think sort of a driverless tractor can be sort of the central platform for a farm. And the fact that we don't have one seems like kind of a great tragedy of this industry.
That's good.
Just to finish, the biggest challenge is to assure food quality and food safety. You can assure that to a brand, like the big food companies that assure the consumer. And we try to do that because we want to do that in Italy because we have a lot of single producer, but we don't think that to have all them under the same umbrella, of a company umbrella, that is the solution, but we have to do something to have a shield to protect the consumer, give it the guarantee that we deliver good Italian food with good quality and safe for food.
Well, thank you all very, very much. We are almost there. We've expired. We're over time. So thank you all very, very much. You were good sports. I appreciate it very much. Interesting stuff. I heard a lot of things that I haven't heard before. So why don't we all give them a big hand?
Thank you.